Everyone, welcome to Women Seeking Wholeness. I'm Cherie Burton. This is a podcast for women who long to feel, express, and be who they truly are. What is sound healing? Well, I have to tell you, I've been studying energy medicine for a while, and many of you probably have as well, just understanding frequency, vibration, coherence, dissonance, resonance, all of that. I mean, it's quantum physics, it's science. But when it comes down to like your etheric body, your astral body, your mental body, your soul, how do sound frequencies affect those? So my Australian friend, Katische Haberfield, is a crystalline sound alchemist, and she believes the secret to life is vibration. How you vibe is how you resonate with the world and how you really show up and do everything in life. So it's so interesting. And many of you have probably heard of crystal singing bowls, but in this episode, we're going to dive into why those are making a resurgence and kind of Katisha's journey to how they found her, which is very typical when you're embarking on a soul path. It usually finds you. You don't have to do a lot of hunting. So you're going to hear her story with that and how she and I met a few years ago in Australia when I was teaching about emotional healing. And, you know, it's interesting how you circle back with people and they find you again and you're in a different space than you were when you'd originally met. And it's fun how Katisha and I have circled back with each other. She really has completely done a deep dive into her, not only her own soul and her own soul path, but everything about the crystalline body, the crystal singing bowls and how they affect the body's subtle energy. Because guess what? Our bodies themselves are at the quantum level crystalline structures. Katische, welcome to Women Seeking Wholeness.
Thank you, Cherie. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's been fun to reconnect with you. You and I met in Australia. Gosh, I think we figured it was like 2015, 2016, something like that.
Something like that, yes.
I was presenting and you're in the audience, and I feel really bad because you really got a disconcerting text in the middle of my presentation. Was it in the middle of my presentation or was it after?
I think it was in the middle of your presentation.
Yeah. And was it your grandmother that had passed away?
Yes, my grandmother had passed away. That's right. She was old, so it didn't come as any surprise. However, it's never a nice time to receive that kind of a text message. But yeah, you were presenting, and I think at that time I was inhaling peppermint essential oil, and I started crying, and I was trying to figure out what was upsetting me. And I just had this feeling that something had changed. And I became really, really deeply emotional. But I didn't know that my grandmother had passed yet. And it wasn't until I left the room and turned my phone on that I got a message from my mum saying that it was actually my grandmother had passed. And I had this distinct knowing that I knew the very second that she had passed, because that was when I had got emotional and I was inhaling peppermint essential oil at that time. Now, there was also this knowing that it was that way because my mum has a very strong reaction to peppermint essential oil. She really doesn't like the smell. And it's one of those things that you can pass down epigenetically, aversions to smells. And there was this association that I believe my mother had with her mother, with peppermint and with all smells that smell very Germanic, because my grandmother was German. Wow. And so, for example, the blend On Guard essential oil that doTERRA have is a smell that she really can't stand, and neither can my sister. And it smells to me like German Christmas. And I love it. But my mum had a, up and down relationship with her mum, and it really it sets her off. Yeah, peppermint and the On Guard set her off. And I believe that somehow because I associated it positively with my grandmother, it's just the smells that remind me of my grandmother. I believe it's something that reminds her negatively of her mother for some reason. Yeah. And that's how I knew and associated the smells with the time of her death. Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
Well, I'm sorry for your loss those years ago, and I'm sorry that the timing was that it happened during my presentation. And I'm grateful you didn't link that sad experience with me, and also that we've been able to continue our association. Just so the people know, I've been teaching about essential oils and mind body holistic science, in respect, not just with essential oils, but on that particular presentation, I was talking about emotions and essential oils and how we, lock the energy of emotion into our tissues, and how smell and the senses, because we are multisensory beings, can actually facilitate a dislodging, or as you mentioned, a memory that can evoke a visceral reaction through smell being your most powerful. You could arguably like the most complex sense you have, 10,000 times more complex than the sense of sight. And what we're going to talk about today, which is your guru specialty, is sound. Now let's back up a little bit, because I love your take on the senses, how there are our 5 physical, and I've been teaching about senses for a while, that there's a spiritual pathway and a physical pathway for every one of our senses. And there's also other senses that we don't even know about, like spidey sense, you could say, to some degree. But why don't you just engage our listeners with that fascinating sort of prelude to why you do what you do, and what your take on the senses is in relation to our healing?
Okay, so the 5 senses, the way that we as human beings in this physical body experience the human incarnation. And so it's the gateway to our human experience. It's what we rely on for our truth and our understanding and our perceptions of the world. However, there are more ways that we can interact with the world, but in this physical body, senses are the king. So I started off my life as a management consultant after university, so it has nothing to do with sound or senses. Yeah, and path for me went from being a management consultant for a few years until the dot-com bubble burst in the NASDAQ crash in 2000. And then I thought to myself, and here's the first sensory entrance, what do I actually love doing? Because I really didn't enjoy the corporate ride. I saw the long hours and the negative way people treated each other and their clients, and I didn't want to be a part of it. And so I looked around, and wine was my thing. I was like, yeah, everyone knows I love to talk about wine. I love to drink wine. I'm really curious about it. How can I get involved in wine? I went and studied wine at university level and lived and worked in wineries in wine regions in Australia for quite some time before I got married and had children. And then after I had my children, fairly quickly after that, within a couple of years, I found myself as a single parent. I divorced my husband. I left my husband in a very cataclysmic period of my life. And I was introduced to essential oils as a way of helping my children at the time, who were very sick with the proper influenza. And so my journey with the oils began just as a mother using them. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. But the backstory about the oils began to be that I actually started to use them a lot more because I had a divorce. I had a very good friend of mine had an accident and went into locked-in syndrome, where she could only move her eyeballs and blink. She's totally physically paralyzed. And I lost my father from prostate cancer, all within a 2-year period. So as you can imagine, that kind of turns your world upside down. And I began to have really major anxiety and panic attacks. And the oil bergamot was the first oil that really, really helped me. So I began to understand, and I'm a research geek by nature, that I studied and tried everything to figure out how, when I was going into this panic state of being in the middle of the night, because there was just too much happening in my outside world, so that when I went to sleep at night, I couldn't rest. There was just too much grief that needed to come out. I was worried about my status in the world, obviously, having two children, 2 and 4 at the time, just dealing with all the logistics of having a small children, and then processing all of those amazing emotions to go through with those 3 key people in my life. And I researched everything, and I couldn't find anything that would stop the panic attacks until literally I found bergamot.
And bergamot, just so everyone knows, that's the name of an essential oil. I believe it's sourced in Italy, and it's a fruit.
It is a fruit, yes. I call it the orange lime lemon. It's kind of a funny looking, big, gigantic fruit. And I found that if I inhaled that bergamot, within 1 minute, my blood pressure and my panic was gone. And I'll tell you, the disgusting side of life was that my panic attacks became so bad that they would make me vomit. And so I could bring the oil up to my nose and it would stop it mid-convulsion kind of thing. So I was like, boy, this stuff is interesting. Let me learn more. Learning more about that led me into doing it as a hobby business. And then I hit 42 and bang, I went into perimenopause. Now, perimenopause was an eye-opener for me because everything in my life began to change. If it hadn't changed before, with divorce and the death and everything like that, suddenly my physical body began to change, and I experienced what most people do in perimenopause and menopause, which is changes in my limbic system because of the change in the hormones. So when we talk about perimenopause and menopause, we mostly think about hot flushes, weight gain, changes in your period, and we think about all the hormones that are in your ovaries and your womb. But we don't think a lot about the hormonal changes that are actually in your brain, because they're produced as well in the limbic system. So this was kind of like, wow, a big eye-opener for me. And I realized that a lot of people were experiencing extreme anxiety as a result of these changes. They didn't know what was going on with their body. And I realized that I was accessing insight into what was happening to myself at that time, and that perhaps I could share and help these people. So by sharing my insights as I was going through this, it's been a couple of years now, I'm 45, I started to created a little Facebook group, invited women in, and I was able to have a group whereby I provided insights for people and taught them basically what the basics of was happening with their body, but also with their mind. But I started to get a little bit frustrated, really quite frustrated, because the women were seeing the symptoms of perimenopause and being really quite upset about those symptoms. And wanting to get rid of them. And so they were coming into the group and were seeking a solution for their symptoms. And so I would not offer advice, but suggest things that had worked for myself. And the more and more people would come in, and they were really focused on how bad these symptoms were, which I understand they were really bad. They can be quite debilitating. But they were not seeing the overall picture of what was happening to themselves, what the body was sending messages to them, because I believe that every physical symptom that you have has an emotional and spiritual component behind it. So if we just look at the fact that we might have a hot flush, and we don't see that the hot flush is usually triggered by the body needing to release anger, then we can miss the fact that we might actually be going through a period where our body is sending us intense messages about what we're dissatisfied with in life, what we are upset about in terms of what we have and haven't achieved in life, because this is also timed as the midlife crisis stage of your life. And what we want to do and what we're no longer willing to settle about. So there are messages there, just like with one single symptom. And I really wanted to help women look from a much higher perspective and understand that this was not only doom and gloom part of life. This was actually a process by which the body was trying to change and to move ourselves out from being an intense period of being the nurturer role in life, to birthing the new reality for ourselves. And the womb is the center of all creation. So obviously the womb creates life, but the womb is also the center of creativity in women. And so I wanted women to be able to understand that the next phase in their life, as their menstrual cycle changed, as they grew older, they were no longer useless or to be discarded in life because their reproductive capabilities slowed down and ceased being. They're actually moving into the wisdom phase, called the crone phase, where we were to begin to be the wisdom bearers, but also, the wise woman, but also the really intense creative period in our life.
Sure.
And I really wanted to guide women spiritually through this. And so I left behind the focus on perimenopause and began to do a search in 2020 about where I wanted to take it. And this led me to the Crystal Singing Bowl at the same time that it led me through a journey with the Divine Feminine, Mary Magdalene and Mother Mary. And my world went on a retreat basically for the whole of 2020, discovering and understanding how perimenopause and menopause coincides with the awakening of creativity and the awakening of the Divine Feminine within ourselves.
That makes a lot of sense. I'm just going to insert here that for me, I'm 52 now. I just turned 52 this month. And it's been an interesting journey looking back over like the last 5 years of, my entry into menopause at age 49 and how it absolutely coincided with most of the things in my world kind of falling apart. My husband and I almost got a divorce. I started having these awakenings about the masculine, the over-structuralization is a word of the masculine forms in my life that weren't serving, like religion, aspects to religion, I should say. And just looking with new eyes at structures. And it was almost like that divine, feminine, nuanced, beautiful energy of inclusivity and collaboration and expansion. It was just trying to have it like break out of me, like rise up in me.
Absolutely.
And it looked like everything was coming down. In retrospect, it was rebuilding. So my creativity actually was enhanced. That's right about the time I started this podcast. Just FYI, everybody, it was like, I started this podcast the month after I turned 50. So almost exactly 2 years ago. It'll be 2 years this February 22nd. And what's been so interesting is that my I love that you're saying that it's not actually the time that your creativity is dimmed. Like you didn't miss your window. I feel like your whole life has been ramping up in a woman's life cycle, let's just say, to birth a different kind of creativity that's very soul-based and
Absolutely.
very embodied, because she's learned what's important and what's not, and what's the illusions that she was chasing in the first half of her life just don't hold any substance for her anymore. And so the creativity is deeper.
Absolutely. Yes. And as we learn to become more aware of our physical body, what it does is it then cues all our other intuitive senses to then pay attention to when the body is sending messages. So you'll find that women become much more intuitive as well, because they trust what everyone else calls gut instinct. I don't call it gut instinct. I call it womb instinct.
Yeah. Yeah. Even in men, really kind of like it's that same region.
Yes, absolutely. And so the more that you can spend time during this period of life actually looking to deconstruct illusions, deconstruct realities, and as you said, structures, to say, okay, so this is what the world has conditioned me to believe. This is how I followed my path. Am I satisfied or am I not? Because what happens if we bring a little bit of astrology in is that, well, we have our Chiron return between the ages of 49 to 51. Mm-hmm. And that is when basically the world says, honey, listen here, it's time we had a chat. When you were born, you came to the world with a specific time, which was placed specifically with the family that you came in with and the location on earth that you came with and a sole purpose. Mm-hmm. I've let you play around for a little while now, sweetheart, and you're not doing what you came here for. So do you need some more messages? In which case I'm going to shake things up for you and I'm going to remove a whole bunch of things that are clouding that vision in your face. Or you're going to start to pay attention and you're going to instinctively work towards, in your own way and time, what it is that you're meant to be doing. Mm-hmm. We also get a little bit of that prior to that, depending upon your astrological chart. And now I'm no astrology expert, but it's something that I've been interested in my entire life. And one of the things that's really interesting is that our midlife transit is when our Pluto squares Pluto. And Pluto is about soul contracts, right? And so for me, when I was going through my astrological chart a few weeks ago, I found that my Pluto squared Pluto exactly at the time when I left my husband.
Wow.
So that soul contract was finished.
Wait, I almost got divorced when that happened, when I hit my Chiron.
Yeah, well, this was the one before. This is a Pluto square Pluto, and then I'm coming up to my Chiron return in the next few years. But, you know, life sends us messages and it brings people in and out, and they are meant to help us have experiences which lead us to this path. And the people that we meet actively help us understand the divine feminine, the divine masculine. And it's not until we get to this central part in our life in terms of the birthing of our creativity, the uprising of the divine feminine energies in us, that we kind of get this awakening that says, okay, there's a lot of forces at play. I have this feminine feeling at the moment. What is it? How does it define me? How does it work in relation to males? And that sort of realizing and awakening understanding that we are both female and male energies inside of us, that neither is good or neither is bad, and that to blame and shame based on your gender or your affinity is not to understand the piece that we are both masculine and feminine within. Right. And therefore we need to learn to work with those energies. And it helps. It's a time really of great spiritual change, because it's a time when we understand that we are actually more than this physical body. We're here to achieve something on earth, and that there are tools and techniques that can help us understand this and navigate this time. But we are essentially, as they say, a child of God or a product of Source, because we are Source trying to express and understand itself. We are both masculine and feminine. We are from the divine. So, and that comes in my journey, because when you look at using the sensory aspects, one of the next parts of the journey that works with the body is sound. And in my deep dive into the divine feminine, understanding the role of the womb and creation, I just ended up at a shop one day purchasing a set of crystal singing bowls, which is not something that I would have ever imagined that I would do. I'm not a musical person in any way, shape or form. I banged around on a piano during my childhood and had drum lessons, but I would be classically described as woeful at music. But I enrolled in a integral sound therapy course at the beginning of 2020, and it has changed the trajectory of where I'm going in my life, because what brought into my life was a really intense understanding on sound and how sound can be used in this period of a woman's life, just like smell or aroma can be used to help a woman guide and navigate her journey through their life. The sound is a really important thing to understand in terms of the soundscape of your life and how you are using and responding to sound as a stimulus to know and understand yourself, and how you use sound as a way to shape your world. And not a lot of people really think about the sound that's in their life.
So let's go into the quantum mechanics of this, because you happened to saunter into the store and these singing bowls were there. And like, there was a part of your soul that like knew, hey, this is your path. This is something that you've been prepared for. I mean, sometimes we don't always have the conscious awareness of that now, but you do now. No. These things never show up by accident, right? It's just, there's no such thing as coincidence in the spirit realm. But sound, let's start with the light and frequency and the vibrational medicine, if you will, of sound. And let's define for our audience. I mean, I know a lot of my listeners are pretty savvy about energy. And I talk about it a lot. I talk about feminine energy and masculine energy. And I really want to get really quantum here, just for like the lay person coming in who doesn't maybe understand vibration and what that is in terms of quantum energy.
Yeah, so vibration is how we measure the energy. So everything in the universe is made up of energy, and energy resonates and has its own frequency. And so frequencies can be measured. There's lots of different machines that measure the frequency of energy, and frequencies and energy also has a sound to it. So everything in the universe has a sound, even if you can't hear it. So we are surrounded by sound, even when we are completely silent.
And like you and I had talked earlier that you said the universe is full of noise, but we only hear like a fraction of it.
Yeah. And this can be demonstrated. The human ear can only hear a very small range of sound. But if you look at, say, dolphins have a very high pitch ability to hear sound at an extremely high level. Cats and dogs can hear sounds that we can't hear. I've always had a very good sense of hearing. I was always the child, even, at primary school. I remember walking into the room and saying to the teacher, can I please go and turn that TV off? The pitch is hurting my ear. And they're like, the TV's not on. And what they do, but when somebody turns off a TV but they haven't turned it off properly, the screen is black but it's still actually turned on.
There's kind of like this low buzz or something.
Yeah, well, to my ear I can hear the really high pitch of it, and I'm like, that's going to drive me nuts if I have to sit here. That's pretty unusual as a 6-year-old to go, can I go and turn off the TV that you think is off that's actually still on?
That's so interesting. I just want to say, like, a lot of the children on the earth right now, and I'm talking like young adults too that are included in this, because I have a child that was very, very, very sensitive to sound and would plug his ears when no one else was hearing anything else. I think that some of these souls coming in are really attuned to some of these sound vibrations that are not being heard by generations. Like, they just seem to have a sensitivity. You've heard of the sensory disorders, right? That are making a huge resurgence of children with these sensory disorders. I think that they're just more attuned to some of the vibrations of the universe that we're not.
Yeah. Sensory disorder. How about a sensory gift? is how I'd like to reframe it. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. They're being labeled as, defective, if you will, but actually they have highly attuned gifts.
Yes. And I think that a lot of them, my children are very sensitive to sound as well. They do not like fireworks still as teenagers. It's just a sound that they don't like. I've always known that I was clairaudient. And so I think that a lot of people who are very sensitive to sound may find that they're actually sensitive because, and what I said to you off air before was that our ear is not just an ear, it's an organ of consciousness. And so the job of the ear is to not only bring in sounds to the body so that we can interpret our world around us, but it's a protective organ as well. So because there are so many sounds out there in the universe, and you can, if you turn on a radio and you've missed the station, you can still do this on a digital radio, you hear that kind of a noise, which frightens you because it's like, oh, I've missed the channel. What is this static noise? But the universe is full of noises like that because everything is vibrating. It's just that our ear is protecting us from hearing, because otherwise it'd be like having a billion TVs on at once. We wouldn't be able to focus or concentrate. And so we are designed to be able to narrow in and out of focus on things that we need to see and hear. It's the same as when you talk to somebody, say one of your siblings, about memories from childhood. They will see and have heard and have tasted and have smelt different things to you whilst you were standing next to each other. Yeah. My sister and I often talk about how we are talking about the same thing, but we don't remember a particular aspect. It's because as ourselves, we're on our own journey and our own paths. We can be in the same room, experience the same situation, but our bodies are focused in on different parts that our soul needs for our journey. And so we discard the multiple other sensory inputs that we don't need in that very moment. So yes, the ear's role is to protect the body, because sound is absorbed by the body, and then it gets passed through the nervous system. And if we were allowed to hear everything, like we'd just be shaking from the impact of the sound that comes in all of the time. So yeah, the sound, what we need to do in our life is to learn to train our ears to actually distinguish sound. And just like with an essential oil, where you can have a reaction to an aroma or any aroma out there in life that is encoded in memory, so it can be a positive or negative experience. So, for example, if you had a nasty teacher at school and she always smelled like patchouli,
you just make that association.
Yeah, you make that association. The same happens with sound. So we make associations with sound as well. And what I like to encourage people to think about is we can have really negative reactions to sound. And what we need to do is to uncode that and understand, what is it that I'm really hearing and why am I having the reaction to it? Because when we can just see that it is a sound, that there's nothing to attach to that sound, it's simply a sound, then we can create emotional freedom from the meaning that we've attached to that sound.
Yes, because I think the phrase I really like is perception guides biology. So it's not necessarily the sound, it's the meaning we attach to it. It's our perception of it. Like you said, you could have two people sitting right next to each other eating or hearing the same thing or smelling the same thing, and they'll each have a different visceral reaction to it based on their stored trauma or you could say their epigenetic experience, stuff that's encoded in their DNA or the energy of emotion or what have you. Yeah, there's so much noise out there. We've entered into this electromagnetic pollution, all this like geopathic stress. It's I've always felt like when you really want to understand what your truth is, you need to drown out the voices of others. And I would include in that dissonant noise. Some people always have to have on something like in the background, like whether it's the TV or, I mean, music is a beautiful tool, but some of it's very dissonant, and music is, for me, one of the things that brings me right into my sacred space inside music. Mm-hmm. And yet if I want to be completely apathetic and I just want to go into a zone of being mad, I will intentionally choose music that has that same energy to it.
Absolutely.
So I can see how sound, and music is a great example of this. Sound seems to have a language, and maybe language isn't quite the right word, but it seems to carry with it its own kind of pure, unadulterated, again, it's hitting your perceptive faculty. So you're trying to extrapolate meaning from it to form a perception. But when you're just open and you're trying to come into neutrality and you're hearing beautiful music, it can transmit something to you that you're not even aware of.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really important, just to jump back for a second, that we really be careful about the music that we do play, because it affects us at multiple levels. So one of the things that I was aware of, from teenage years was that a lot of people, their moods changed instantly by the words, the vocabulary, the language that was associated with certain songs. So for example, people that really like the heavy metal, death metal, all that sort of stuff, there's a lot of anger associated in the lyrics of those. And you can see that people use that to express their anger. But if you're not careful, you can become angry because you absorb that. So sound carries the energy of the pure sound itself, but it also carries the intent of the person or the thing that made that sound. So when we're talking about a song, there's the energy associated with the vibrations from, say, the cello or the drums, and each one of those frequencies does something to the body. But then also there's the way that the composer has strung those instruments together to play the music, the composition. And then there's the intention behind what the composer or the writer of the music actually wanted the piece of music to achieve. And then there's the energy behind, on the day that song or that choral piece or the chamber orchestra piece was being produced, the human beings who are creating that sound for you are feeling emotions at that time, and they have their own intent as well. So what you're receiving is a mixed baggage of intention and emotions, and you have to be very careful with what you let into your body, because you will bring in the emotions of other people from the time that they were recording that sound. And they've done studies on this in all of the many books and articles and things that I've studied in the last year, where they have recorded sound. It's 2 pieces of sound, and at the time of the recording, they told the musician to feel angry when they were making this particular one sound, and then the other one was recorded with the feeling of love and bliss. And then they saved those 2 recordings, and they had a group of people. And, like with the placebo test, they gave them the one with the angry feeling, the intent behind the recording, and then one with the harmonious, bliss, loving intent behind it. And I recorded the results of the people who listened to that music and asked them how they felt at the end of it. And how they felt was exactly in line with the intention of the musician. So those that received the angry piece of music felt angry at the end of listening to it, and those that listened to the piece that was recorded with the intention of bliss behind it felt blissed out and loved out. So it's really important to understand that sound creates energy, but it also carries the intention of the person who actually creates or communicates that sound. And so it goes back to quite clearly, somebody can say something to you, but it's the intention behind those words that either makes you feel like you've been stabbed or you've been hugged.
Yes, I have a saying hanging in my bathroom. I think it's by Rumi, something to the effect of, and I wish I could know exactly the words, but it's like, there's a voice inside you that doesn't use words. Listen. And for me, that it's like that subtle energy. It's like that subtle space we go into where we're in between worlds. That's the only way that I can explain it, where you kind of in between your logic brain and your other part of you that wants to go into knowing and experiencing and feeling and in sensing, I guess you could say, as opposed to having to put language around it, having to quantify it or measure it. I feel like we are all, I love that you just put it out there that you're clairaudient. I've talked to multiple women on this show who are clairvoyant, clairsentient, clairaudient, all these things. And it's like, when you honor that voice in you or that uprising or that knowing, the more and more that you do that, the more that these spiritual capacities you have with your senses begin to open and communicate with you on levels that are, again, like they just defy language. It just defies language.
Yeah, that's right. Language is not the only way to communicate. And yes, if you really hone in on something, like intuition for me comes in a spoken form through my right ear. So it's not a gut feeling for me. I don't know it in my stomach. I hear it in my ear. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so I have always known that I was responsive to, say, I really enjoyed listening to audiobooks. Because I receive knowledge in that way. And I now tell my children, if you want to talk to me and you want me to retain the knowledge, you need to talk to me on my right-hand side.
How interesting.
If you want me to just nod and have forgotten what you said, because my children go really deep down when they're talking about things, sit on my left-hand side, because I'll nod and smile and I won't remember a thing you've said. So choose your side. Are we just having a little conversation, or are you telling me the depths of your heart? Which side of the room, which side of the table do you want to be on?
Yeah. It's so interesting. This weekend, I'm going to a drum making class. I have a friend named Melanie Cannon who teaches these beautiful drum workshops, and I'm so excited. I've been wanting to do it for years. I actually interviewed very early in my podcast my friend Katie Joe, who has been helping facilitate drum retreats and drum circles for many, many, many years. And I told her 2 years ago, I'm going to do that. And here I am 2 years later, finally doing it. But I have been in a sound healing session in New York at Omega Institute in New York when I was there a couple of years ago, where a gentleman beat a drum. That's all he did. He just beat a drum. And I had this shoulder issue, and he was able, through his beautiful gifts, to release that through sound. And I kind of went into a trance in a good way. Through the beat of this drum, and I was very relaxed. I felt fully in control of my faculties. I didn't feel like he was infringing on an energetic or spiritual boundary of mine. But I remember as I was kind of going into this trance-like state, very presently, I had two people enter my consciousness, and I pretty much was asleep at this point, but I could see their faces, and I somehow knew that this issue was attached to whatever meaning or belief I was putting on those relationships. And so when I came out of it, he mentioned there's this man and this woman, and they have this role in your life. And I was like, oh my gosh, I could see that. When I fell asleep, I could see, and I could move my shoulder. I had no more pain, and it's never returned.
It's mind blowing, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. But for this drum, but the beat of the drum in the context of that I'm doing this weekend to make the drum is more about feminine empowerment and embodiment, and how these beautiful drums can assist us in the reclamation of our soul, voice, and power. And so it's more about that than actual but it is healing, right? Too, it is sound healing.
Yeah, well, sound healing can be also I assume you'll make noises when you beat these drums other than beating the drum. Usually when people learn to beat a drum, there's this deep urge to, a deep urge to actually chant or shout or sing from the throat that comes out as well. So when we can receive the energies of sound inwards, and that can that actually works with the body and heals the body. So what actually happens is that sound comes in and is absorbed through the body, through the various comes in through the ears, and it comes in and is processed through the nervous system. But what it does is sound resonates with the body, and the body is made up mostly of water and crystalline structures. And what happens is that the sound carries the frequency, and it actually entrains the part of the body that is out of whack, so to speak. So have you ever seen, two examples, have you ever seen somebody line up a row of metronome clocks, them ones that, and if you start them all at different times, they're all out of whack, right? Mm-hmm. But very soon, within a few minutes, they all suddenly come into sync, yeah? And they all go at exactly the same rate. We get a bunch of teenage girls together and put them in the boarding house like I was a boarder. Menstrual cycle will sync. And so you've got a boarding house full of bleeding emotional girls at the same time. Mm-hmm. Bodies sync together. And so sound, that's what sound does. Sound actually looks for the parts of the body that are out of whack, in my lingo, in the non-technical specific, and it brings it in, trains it in so that it all resonates together and creates harmony. Mm-hmm. So sound creates harmony. And so when you're receiving the sound from the drum, that's what it's looking for. It's going straight to where the part of the body that is not in resonance with the rest of the body, that is, because every part of your body, every different organ and cell in your body emits a vibration. So every part of your body is singing a note in its own musical harmony.
That makes a lot of it feels like a cell receptor that's waiting for information to come into the cell that sits on the surface of the cell. That's kind of what visual I'm getting as I'm
that's exactly right. And so it's kind of like a little kid with a speakerphone that's going, Mom, and then the sound goes, hi, I'm here, honey, and just gently shepherds back into space, and then that child is pacified and knows where it is. And it's because every organ and cell in your body, every part of your body emits energy. That energy has a sound, and so when you use sound as a healing tool, it basically comes and rescues. It finds, shepherds in all the bits that are screaming out to their mum and settles them down, and they come into resonance. So sound can be used that way, and when you use your voice or you create your own sound, you're releasing this creative urge or force, and you're allowing energy to be freed, to escape from your body. You're releasing, and that is therapeutic in itself. So if we take it back to, say, the singing bowls, can be made of metal if they're the Tibetan singing bowls, or if they're the crystal singing bowls like I use. They are used to either ground and calm, depending upon the direction in which you play them, or to release energy. So with any form of singing bowl, you play it clockwise to ground and calm somebody, so to harmonize. And during a session with me, for example, I will do both the grounding and the harmony and the releasing. And the releasing is playing anti-clockwise. And so what you're doing when you're using sound in that way is you're releasing any of the energies in the body that are no longer resonating. So the sound from the singing bowl is doing the same thing as that sound from the drum is. It's searching out for the parts of the body that are holding your tension, they're holding the emotion, and it's allowing your body to release that no longer necessary energy. And then quickly after we do the releasing, we then ground and calm you again, because there's no such thing as getting rid of energy in this world. Energy doesn't...
It transmutes.
It transmutes. It has to be transmuted. So you can't leave a vacuum in that space. That has to be filled with something else. So you fill it with the grounding and harmonizing vibration.
That's so interesting talking about the harmony aspect, because, in music theory, you learn about harmonics. And really quickly, as we wrap up, we've gone quite a while, and I love the direction we've gone. And I want to put it back to that YouTube that you sent me about the rosemary plant, and those group of individuals who are putting receptor, I don't know, with their little electrodes or something on these plants and getting harmonics coming back so that they actually sing.
Yes. So it's a series of a whole bunch of videos that you can find, and this guy uses a rosemary plant, a basil plant, a snake plant, multitude of plants, and he was trying to show people that plants resonate energy, and that energy has a sound, and that sound actually can be used to compose music. And so the rosemary bush, for example, is clipped up to this machine that records noise. So it's I don't know the technical term for it, but if somebody goes out into the field and records the sound of ice cracking on a river, for example, they have a machine that captures the sound, and then they come home and they link it up to this machine, and it produces a noise which can be seen as music. And so he's clipped this machine up to the rosemary plant, and it is measuring the vibrations that are coming out, that are being emitted naturally from the rosemary plant. And the rosemary is attached to this machine, and those vibrations are then turned into a form that we can actually hear. And it's like it's singing a song. And with the rosemary plant, it's a really invigorating, upbeat song. Mm-hmm. And that vibration exactly matches if we had the essential oil version of that plant. Rosemary is a stimulating, invigorating essential oil. So what was amazing about this is that we can see that a plant emits energy, B it's noise, but the noise actually has a melody to it that we actually as humans can't hear, but it's sending out this message. And so what its message is, it's conveying the life energy, or the chi, the subtle energy of the plant. And when we can understand that as something as simple as the plants that are beside you in your room or your office convey vibrations, they convey a silent song that we actually can't hear. But when we can understand that, what we're understanding is that what we surround ourselves, even at the plant level, the simple thing that you have in your house beside us, we need to be intentional about what we have, because we are surrounding ourselves with the silent soundscape that is actually influencing our well-being as well. So have a think about what you actually want to put in your room, because if you're going to put lavender or rosemary, then it's going to impact the soundscape, the silent soundscape of your life. And so I guess the work that I have with the crystal singing bowls, and I use the essential oils on the crystal singing bowls as well, is to make people to understand that the world is full of sound. We can open our eyes and our ears to understand and learn how to harness the power of that sound to create a soundscape in our life that is beautiful and harmonious, and helping us move to understanding more about ourselves and more about the world around us, but that we are creating intentionally with sound, and not letting our universe be created in a noisy environment without us being aware of it. Use sound as you would use smell or physical touch as a tool to awaken within you the wonder of the universe and the wonder of who you can be a creative creator in your life, rather than allowing the soundscape of your life to navigate your path. Take charge of your life through the parts of the life that you thought weren't affecting you, and see the huge power that you have by crafting a beautiful soundscape for yourself.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's just putting these stations in your physical environment that can support you energetically so that you have this vibrational medicine happening rather than all the dissonance.
That's right. And I think like the quote that I was going to say to you from Jonathan Goldman would probably be a great way to finish off. It's from his book, Healing Sounds, The Power of Harmonics. And Jonathan Goldman is a leading person in the field of sound and sound healing and energy. And he writes, he's talking about when we listen to the harmonics of sound specifically and learn to use our ear as an organ of consciousness. He says, when we listen to sound in this matter, our entire scope of consciousness changes. We begin to understand the interrelationship of ourselves and the cosmos. And we may find answers to previously unthought of questions. Barriers within ourselves disappear, as do those between ourselves and others. We begin to experience a oneness that helps us realize our interconnectedness with all things. This is an awareness that the spiritual masters from different paths have spoken throughout time. It can be achieved through harmonics and sound.
Beautiful. Well, I have to say, I'm trying to do that on my podcast. I do believe in the vibrational power of the carriage of sound through words and language into someone's heart. And I think you can communicate soul to soul, even if you're not talking directly to that person. But I've had experiences where I'm speaking on stage or I'm speaking to a group of people, and they'll come up and say, I felt like you were just talking right to me. And I think that, like you said, we have these little sensors and receptors on us energetically. And if somebody says something and it hits you and it creates a divine spark or carries it with a charge for you, it can heal you through just that. I mean, it can literally wake you up or bring you back to yourself and into your own knowing, which is always my goal. It's never to be here's the way it is, but rather, how does that feel and resonate how does that resonate with you? How does that feel for you? So
absolutely.
Well, Katische, tell our listeners where they can find you. And I just want to add that I've done a sound healing session with Katische. Even though she's in Australia and I live in the States, we were able to do this over Zoom. And I've never experienced that before. I've been in, there's a salt cave here in Utah where people can go. It's really cool. It's this room that is just all salt, rock around Himalayan salt or something. And then they'll bring in groups of people to do crystal sound bowl healing, and it's just powerful. But I never have done it over Zoom, and you do have that as an offering. Where can people find you online?
Sure. All leads go to Katische, KATISCHE.com. So my first name. And what I mean by that is you can find how to connect with me on any form of social media via my website. That's where you can find all information there. Perfect. Well, thank you so much, my friend, for joining us today. This was really, really interesting. Thank you so much. It's been a blast. Hey, I want to just mention here, and you can find this in the show notes, but if you go to katische.com, you'll get a 25% off her Divine Love Heart Chakra session, which I personally have experienced, and it's gorgeous. If you use the code, and this is in all caps, women-seeking-wholeness. It's a special just for you listeners of my podcast. Maybe just think about how you're creating opportunities in your environment to up your frequency with sound. And most importantly, attuning to that sound within, the frequency that doesn't use words. Have a glorious week. Remember, you can find me on Instagram, Cherie.Burton, as well as asking to join the Facebook group, Women Seeking Wholeness. We'll talk to you next time.